Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. I'm also a county supervisor in Johnson County. Thanks for being with us. Iowa News and Views is a unique community affairs program focusing on local and state issues of interest to Iowans. We're seen in 15 different communities across the state of Iowa, and I'd like to again say hi to viewers in Fairfield, the most recent city and area to join the Iowa News and Views network. Welcome, Fairfield. Iowa News and Views is seen in about 375,000 households across the state, and we have about 1 million viewers. 1 million viewers, that is, if everybody in each of those homes were watching this show. We hope they are, and we hope you'll tell your friends to tune in next time we're on. We're on every week at the same time in your community, so thanks for joining us. I have my remote here, and I'd just like to say, set your remote down, no flipping. We want you to stay with us. We have an interesting program this evening. We have with us tonight former Supreme Court Justice Mark McCormick. Mark is also a candidate this year for the Democratic seat for governor. Thank you, Mark, for being here.
Thank you very much for having me, Joe.
It's a pleasure to have you. Mark grew up in Fort Dodge, Iowa. He, in 1968, was appointed by Harold Hughes to the Iowa District Court, and then in 1972 became the youngest person in Iowa to serve on the state's highest court, the Supreme Court, and he was appointed by Robert Ray, where he served for 14 years, and he now is running for governor. Mark, what brings you to where you are now in terms of this decision to be the governor of Iowa?
Well, a friend of mine said I had a couple of minutes one afternoon when I didn't have anything to do, so I just said I might as well run for governor. Actually, it's kind of a culmination of a lifetime in this state where I've had tremendous advantages and opportunities, a good deal of it spent, as you know, in public office as a prosecutor and later as a judge. And then, after I left the bench, I was involved somewhat in a number of public projects over the last few years, so that I, in my interaction with government, became very much interested in the future, the direction of this state. And I've felt that in so many areas we are playing catch-up instead of anticipating problems. We can still get our arms around our problems in Iowa, and we ought to be identifying them and working together in this state as a single community, addressing issues and really advancing the common good. And I think we need to do a better job of it than we have in the last 16 years.
Very good. For viewers that don't know, Iowa is the only state in the country that has had 30 consecutive years of Republicans in control of the governor's mansion. We're the only state that's seen that kind of tenure. Mark, what's the effect of having one political party in control of the governor's office for 30 years in terms of things like appointments and the like?
Well, we have just done one ideology, one person for the most part, actually two people over this 30-year period, but one at a time who's had very long tenure making those appointments. And it tends to entrench a mindset because the people do represent the person who's made the appointment, and there's a lack of freshness. I think there's an atrophy that occurs, and I deal quite a bit with the government in my law practice. I find that there's a sort of a dry rot that sets in after a while, but just the notion of having a change, I think, would bring about some freshness and some fresh ideas and a fresh approach, which would be very important for the state.
Good. There are a number of issues to visit about tonight, the issue of agriculture and urban issues, education, economic development. I'd like to start with the agricultural issues, in particular the recent decision by the Iowa Supreme Court in Humboldt County and essentially overturning those local ordinances that give local supervisors the ability to say where, set some rules on those. Should supervisors have the say-so about where these facilities are sited, and what are a few things that you would recommend or what you would support as governor?
In that area?
In that area.
Yes. All the Supreme Court, of course, was doing was addressing the question whether the 1995 statute authorized the county to have a role in the citing and the indemnity and the other questions that the county had passed ordinances on. The court doesn't exist to decide whether it's right or wrong or wise or unwise. Sure. I think the 1995 law needs to be changed. We need, I think, to have stricter manure management regulations. I believe that should be done at the state level. One uniform set of environmental standards that should be enforced at the state level. But I do believe that the legislature should change the law and give local government a role, some discretion in the siting of these facilities. And then also, I think the law should be changed to give people back the remedies that they had for 150 years in this state against factory-type operations that hurt their health and their property rights. So you really, in this law, you've got a combination of the legislature having dictated where those facilities can be put, these huge factory-type operations, and then having taken away the remedies that people who are harmed by their location used to have.
So did Iowa make a mistake when we changed our corporate agricultural laws to allow these massive companies with these massive facilities to come into our state?
Well, yes, I think we tilted the law too far toward the industrialization. I think we ought to have a level playing field so that there is a case to be made for growth and size, and so long as the playing field is local, is level, I think that's fine. But the deck really got tilted in favor of these factory-type operations, and I think at the expense of the family farmer and at the expense of Iowans who have to live in the neighborhoods.
Moving on to economic development, there was a report recently on the strategies to improve the quality of life for Iowans, and basically suggests that Iowans, we don't have the skills we need in our workforce, and we don't have enough workers to address some of those issues. Are we doing enough to prepare our young people for the careers in trades and other technical occupations?
No, we're not. And this has been a fundamental problem, I think, in our K through 12 system for probably 15 years in this state, maybe even longer. In my old hometown of Fort Dodge, the local economic development director is having to write Army bases looking for electricians from folks that are leaving the military. But we have concentrated so much on preparing people for four-year academic educations that we've lost sight of the kind of preparation that should be given in our K through 12 system to young people who are going to go to community colleges or to vocational training after high school and then enter the workforce. And really, one of the things that most people probably don't realize, and most young people aren't being told, is that they need a better academic preparation in high school. They need the math, they need the science, and they need the communication skills in order to take the training as electricians or as carpenters or as computer programmers, or for the high-tech jobs in particular that we hope that our economy will have and that they can fill.
Another issue that was raised in that particular report dealt with a changing population in Iowa, more diverse population, Latino, African American, Asian, and the need for us Iowans to be more accepting of differences in diversity as it related really to the whole economic picture. What role can the governor play in encouraging people getting along and working closely together on those issues?
I think the governor has a lot to do with setting the climate of tolerance in our society and in Iowa, and that he or she ought to be a leader in setting by example in the appointments that are made or the opportunities that are provided by the government to be sure to offer equal opportunity to everyone and have an intolerance of anything that occurs in the communities that is detrimental to the opportunities that these folks should have. I was really impressed by a letter that we got from the principal at the elementary school that my 9-year-old son attends in Des Moines recently. In that school, of a little over 300 students, they have 80 children from foreign countries, from 5 different foreign countries. And that, of course, burdens the schools with some challenges that schools didn't have before. But it's a wonderful opportunity for our children to meet these people from other cultures. And I know my children are learning a lot just from being with those kids.
Moving to education, Iowa seems to be, we seem to be slipping in education in Iowa. Some various test scores are cited recently. What are we going to do to improve the educational system? What would be a couple things that you could point out that you think are important areas that we need to focus on?
I think we've gotten complacent and we have slipped. I think we need to do, we need to answer 3 questions. What do we want our children to learn? Who do we want to teach them? And under what conditions do we want them taught? What do we want them to learn? I think we want them to learn the core curriculum that they're going to need, which is actually reading, writing, arithmetic. Who do we want to teach them? We want the best possible teachers who are fairly treated. Under what conditions do we want them taught? I think we want them taught in safe buildings, in classrooms that are of manageable size, and given the opportunities for learning and the stimulation in the environment that'll maximize those opportunities.
So one of the issues of the third point you raise is under what conditions. We have significant school infrastructure issues in Iowa. I think the Iowa State report put about $3.4 billion or something close to that on unmet school needs, leaky roofs, facility. The state, we're one of a few states that don't provide any resources to local communities to address that. What do we need to do about this? Is there a role for the state? Should the state be putting resources into local school districts?
Well, we do now through the school foundation aid formula and through other mechanisms. And we need to do it with the problem with school buildings too, at least in a period of budget surpluses. And the safety issue alone is serious enough in the schools, with 10% of the school buildings in Iowa having serious fire code violations, according to the state fire marshal, that I think we should make an immediate appropriation out of our budget surplus of $100 million, which could be given to school districts on a per pupil basis so that it was equitable. And that money would be used, I think, and could be required to be used to improve school safety. That has to do with the school environment, but there are, of course, other issues that affect learning other than the condition of buildings.
We seem to be spending a lot more money these days on prisons, in the prison beds, and I know you have a lot of background in the criminal justice system. And can we afford to do schools and prisons as we continue to criminalize more things and put, make more things illegal and have stiffer penalties for things? It seems like we've moved to where we've created a lot of laws, and sometimes the legislature isn't always, we create a law and then at the county level, the jails start filling, the impacts start. Where do we need, where's the resources going to come from in balancing those? And speak maybe to that question about criminal penalties.
Sure. Yeah, we say that conduct has consequences, and that's why we have these penalties. I think the General Assembly and the policymakers who have increased penalties and created new penalties should be aware that those changes have consequences too, and now we're playing catch up in prison construction because of that. I believe that I could save out of the corrections budget in this state $50 million a year by addressing the question of the classification of prisoners that are being kept under security in our prisons. First of all, more than half of the increase in prison population that we've had in the last 10 years has occurred because of the increasing duration of penalties. We ought to be working more at the front end. I think $1 invested at the front end is going to save 10 or more in paying for incarceration. And as to the those who do fall into the system, we need to do a lot more than we've done in Iowa with the classification so that we can put people in community corrections, people who've been involved in drug offenses, putting them through treatment programs. And one conservative think tank has reported that it's actually more economically efficient and effective to give folks some treatment for these drug problems before turning them back to the communities than not to do it, because we end up paying social costs through recidivism when people are not treated. So I feel very strongly that we have neglected this whole issue of the structure of the criminal justice system and have emphasized the warehousing of human beings at the expense of the economy and at the expense of our schools. I'd love to live in Iowa where we are rushing to build school buildings at the pace that we're currently rushing to build prisons.
Sure, good point.
And we can do it.
Good point. You're watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. We're at Midpoint. Our guest is Mark McCormick. He's a Democrat candidate for governor running this year in 1998. I'd like you to check out our webpage if you are online, have internet connection. Give us some ideas about future guests, future topics. We'd like to have them. You can send them to us and learn more about the show. Also, we have an email address if you're online. Again, send us your ideas. We appreciate that. And remember, no flipping. We've got a few more minutes to go here, and you're doing a good job. Mark, back to you. Drug testing has been an issue in Iowa the last couple legislative sessions. The House just passed a bill that makes it easier for employers to test their employees for drugs. There's a lot of concern about that. If you were governor, how would you interact with that bill? Would you be signing that bill? Do you have some? What would you?
I've got some reservations about the legislation that was passed. I think any fair-minded person would agree that we need a safe workplace. My concern is with the aspects of the bill that deal with job security and with rehabilitation and treatment. There have been some changes from the existing law in that area. I really think that we ought to be working very hard not to intimidate employees. We ought to be encouraging them if they've got an issue or a problem involving drugs, and we ought not to be jeopardizing job security just with the threat of testing, and which can make mistakes. And we also need, I think, to provide offer adequate treatment and rehabilitation opportunities.
Sure. Another bill during this current session that also passed in the House was the environmental audit bill. And for viewers that might not be aware of this, it would allow a company that might have an environmental infraction or problem, they're polluting, essentially to self-report that to the Department of Natural Resources, and it would never be public. And we passed a bill that would allow that kind of secrecy around that, and I know there was a lot of debate about that. What's your sense of that approach to dealing with environmental protection?
You can make an argument that this will cause an improvement in the condition of the environment because businesses will be wanting to take advantage of the law and be cleaning up situations that now are concealed. From that point of view, it's not a bad idea, but what bothers me is the whole element of secrecy and the complexity of the law. Lots of times when laws are passed, they're characterized as being full employment acts for lawyers, and my problem with that bill is that I think it's a full employment act for lawyers, and it'll be years and years before we know what can be secret, what isn't going to be secret, and be able to assess whether or not it actually has fostered a cleaner environment. I think we try to solve too many problems sometimes by legislation of this kind, and it's a form of social engineering, really. And my own view is we would be better off without it.
With talking about the environment for a moment, water quality is obviously a big issue around the state. The Department of Natural Resources is one of those agencies that's been appointed for the last 30 years by the same party. And they've come under attack on the hog issue, for certain, not being strong enough on that. What can we be doing to have a stronger environmental protection program in Iowa?
We ought to have an attitude in the governor's office that it is not inconsistent with economic development and a good business climate also to have a clean environment. In fact, I think most businesses treat that as a given. But I think perhaps our administration has not. And we fund environmental enforcement in Iowa at a lower per capita rate than any state in the United States. So that on this hog lot question, for example, our entire Department of Natural Resources is monitoring 3 of these manure lagoons out of the hundreds that exist in Iowa. 2 of them incidentally leak. But we don't know the condition of our groundwater or even our surface water in this state because it's not being checked. So that needs to be changed.
Sure, good. I know the Iowa Environmental Council is very big on that. It's interesting seeing some things happen there. Cities. It seems like cities have been ignored in Iowa for some time. The current governor doesn't really recognize cities as a vital part of Iowa. What would Mark McCormick do for cities?
I attended a meeting of some representatives of the League of Cities recently during the course of this campaign. One of the mayors said, I tried to make an appointment with the governor, and the word that came back from his office is, I don't meet with mayors. I would meet with mayors. I think we're in this together, and that there should be a sharing of responsibility between the state and local government for the issues that we have in common. I'd like to see a lot more cooperative relationship between the state level government and local government. Cities are on the firing line, just as counties are on the firing line. And that's really where services are more accessible, they're delivered better at the local level, and we ought to be recognizing that as a state and encouraging and supporting government at those levels.
Great. What should we be doing about gambling in Iowa?
I think we need to put the brakes on. I support the notion that we should declare a moratorium on gambling. and pay a little bit more attention to the social costs, measure those costs, and see really whether steps need to be taken to cut back, whether it be in setting limits, but at least not encourage more gambling until we've made a full assessment of where it's taken us.
There's been a lot of, in local government, coming back to that for a minute, tax issues around how we fund things. We use property tax, we have obviously income tax, there's a lot of concern about the local option tax. Schools now looking towards that. What do we need to be doing with our tax system in Iowa to make it more progressive and fair?
Of course, the most progressive tax we have is the income tax, and in looking at the state's role in educational funding, I think we ought to be looking at the state level because of that. It has a more progressive tax resource. I think the same consideration would bear on taking some of the load off the property tax, for example. We've taken half of the state institutional load off the property tax, although that's not been fully implemented yet. It appears to me that we next ought to be looking at taking that full component off the property tax and taking care of that expense at the state level. People don't like that property tax. The legislature does have a committee that's supposed to be looking at the entire tax system, and they'll be reporting to me next year when I'm governor, and I'll be looking more closely at those things. But I think the property tax needs to be fairer. I think the income tax needs to be fairer, and we should retain the progressive income tax. And I don't think we ought to be just hodgepodge, in a hodgepodge manner, increasing the sales tax all over Iowa.
Right.
We've got 36 counties now that have that local option sales tax, and in some areas the proposal now is to raise it to 7 cents.
Thank you. We've come to that portion of the show now called the People's Podium. We have with us tonight Linda Nelson, and Linda's a counselor at Hills Elementary School in Hills, Iowa, and she's going to be talking to us about educational funding issues that are currently going on in the state legislature. Linda.
Thank you, Joe. I had the honor to be present in Congress 10 years ago when the champion of senior citizens' rights, the late Representative Claude Pepper, introduced into Congress the Younger Americans Act, which was modeled after the Older Americans Act. When the Washington Press Corps asked Representative Pepper what it would cost, he replied, "Nothing compared to the worth of our children." Unfortunately, no such spirit exists in the Republican delegation to this year's Iowa legislature. To add insult to injury, the undercutting of public education in Iowa is being disguised as what is being called an educational reform initiative. Let me give you some examples of what I think of as doublespeak. In the lean times of the last 20 or 30 years of tight state budgets, education has been told repeatedly to bite the bullet. Now finally, with a surplus in the state budget, schools are getting the lowest allowable growth funding in recent history, only 3%. Schools estimate that they need at least 4% allowable growth funds just to maintain current programs. Districts around the state are already laying off teachers and counselors, buildings are crumbling, scores are dropping, and class sizes are rising. One form this doublespeak is taking is a supposedly new money in the form of block grants. Here is the hocus pocus. If the amount of the proposed block grants were added to the proposed allowable growth money, the amount would equal last year's allowable growth appropriation, no new monies in these block grants. Additionally, some of the money being called new block grant funds are from a variety of existing education and at-risk grant programs that are being dumped into the block grant stream. In the past, these meager funds were concentrated through grants in needy areas. Instead, these block grants now will take these same insufficient funds and spread them equally around the state, making new programs impossible, and many existing successful programs will cease. This whole issue is about scarcity. Instead of funding schools and programs sufficiently, through this hocus pocus, we're going to spread a small amount around, call it something new, and then we're going to blame education for the resulting school failure of students. If instead we were talking about block grants that were 10 times the amount proposed, say 70 to 90 million instead of 7 to 9 million for kindergarten through 3rd grade, then maybe we could be talking about real educational reforms, such as lowering class size. Research estimates that for every dollar spent on prevention and education with children, you save $3 later on in treatment and incarceration costs. Investing. Really investing in public education is not only the cost-effective thing to do, but also it's the right thing to do. Otherwise, we better be ready to continue to support the skyrocketing cost of prison spending in Iowa, which has increased from $43 million in 1991, twofold to a proposed $150 million in 1999. I don't know about you, but I'd rather invest in potential for Iowa's future instead of punishment. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Linda. Thank you very much. You're watching Iowa News and Views. We're about to wrap it up. Mark, any final points you would like to make?
Well, I listened to Linda, and a good deal of what she said I've tried to embrace in making a series of 6 relatively fundamental and comprehensive proposals in education. I think that there is no greater challenge to state government than addressing the question of the condition of education in the state right now. Our system of public education is virtually under siege, and that by addressing some of the fundamental questions instead of dealing in gimmickry or, as she was characterizing, the tinkering with spreading very thinly new programs, we're not really getting down to the basic problems that will test our commitment. We need to reinvest in education and reinvigorate it and show as communities and as parents whether we really do want our schools to be better.
Great. Mark, I appreciate you being here tonight and visiting with us about your campaign. Good luck. It's quite a task running statewide and visiting with a lot of people. I'm sure you're having some fun with it, but it's a heck of a commitment as well.
Well, it is fun, and that's what makes it worthwhile, and also is, I think, a pretty meaningful activity to be involved in. Thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. Pleased to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Again, thanks to the crew always doing the work, our contributors and our local sponsors around the state. Remember, this is just a TV program. What's important is what you're doing each and every day in your community to make it a better place. Mark McCormick's out there working on it. Linda's working on it. It's your turn. See you next time.